Good afternoon. Yes, there certainly are. In fact, it's exactly the kind of event which class actions were designed for. We have a huge number of Australians, over 10 million, who've been impacted, and most of those will have suffered relatively modest losses, which makes it difficult for them to claim in court individually. And of course, the courts don't want to deal with thousands of separate litigations, so the best way to determine the rights of the Optus customers is in a single class action litigation.
The CEO's resignation, could that help or hinder a class action?
It should be totally irrelevant. I think it will be welcomed by a lot of people, but I think in the litigation itself, the CEO won't need to give evidence, or if they do, whether or not they're still working with Optus will be irrelevant.
How does a business or individual prepare to be part of something like this?
Yes, so there's two things that you should do, whether you're a business or an individual. Number one, keep a record of the services that were not connected and the period of the outage for you, because it did vary from customer to customer. And number two, and the most importantly, is gather evidence of their financial loss as a result of the outage. So people will only be paid compensation to the extent that they can prove financial loss. There'll be no compensation for inconvenience or for hassle. So people need to provide hard evidence of their monetary loss, and they should gather that evidence now while they can.
How big could an outage claim be?
Well, it's very difficult to quantify loss at this early stage, certainly because of the raw number of businesses and individuals that were impacted. I'd expect the claim to be in the tens of millions and possibly the hundreds of millions of dollars.
If not a class action, what other penalties could the telco face?
So they could be fined. I think people seeking compensation could ask Optus directly for compensation, or they can lodge a complaint with the Telecommunications Industry Ombudsman, which is a completely free service. And usually complaints are dealt with quite quickly, although this outage might stretch their resources a bit. Certainly in my experience, the Telecommunications Ombudsman is a great alternative, particularly for those with smaller claims.
Viewers are giving us their thoughts on a class action. Cheryl Ann Flynn writes, good luck on that. Now, you've given us the grounds for it, but what's the likelihood of a class action, Alex?
I think it is likely. I think somebody will have to stump up and be the lead plaintiff, which is the person that represents the group, and a law firm will need to support the class action, or possibly a litigation funding company. I think it's almost inevitable that a class action will happen, but whether or not that leads to individuals getting justice or getting justice quickly is another question.
Michelle Shoesmith says they offered compensation in the form of products that are completely useless to us, 200 GB extra data when we never get through all the data anyway. If the offer of extra data isn't cutting it, Alex, what are other options for getting compensated despite, other than going to the Ombudsman?
But I think the offer to compensate people with data is just the beginning of what Optus is going to offer. I realise that's not appropriate, and I don't think for a second it is appropriate, but I think Optus will up their offer, and I think they'll be paying financial compensation to some people, and they'll certainly be looking at letting people out of their contract and other remedies that are available. And I think it's early days in the terms of what Optus are going to offer people.
That's an interesting response and could lead to this next question from Zay H. Tutt, who writes, I'm an Optus prepaid customer and did not receive 200 GB. When I rang, the automated answering system said 200 GB for eligible customers and put me on hold, waiting 30 minutes. Still waiting.
Yes, so that's an outrageous position. I think Optus really need to up their game in the way they're responding to this. I know they've been very slow, and I'm not defending them for a second, but I think over time they will add resources to dealing with the complaints people are making, and they will gradually respond better than they have. And I think people should be continuing to complain to Optus and seeking redress with them directly or through the courts if they need to.
Matt Jones says, we lost our ability to communicate for a single day. Bring us their heads. Is talk of a class action unreasonable? I mean, Optus, as we stated earlier, it's no stranger to them.
Yes. Well, I think that's an interesting point. I think this did create a lot of hassle for a lot of people, a lot of inconvenience for a lot of people. But I think for many people, it wasn't really anything except a holiday from their mobile phone, which perhaps was welcome. And I think we should distinguish between those people and I guess people who, were not able to make emergency calls, people who run businesses and were not able to take money over the counter, so they lost business as a result of it. I think this outage affected different people in different ways, and I think we should acknowledge that and realise that different classes of people are likely to be entitled to different types of compensation. And for the vast majority of people, they probably won't be entitled to any compensation or very minimal compensation.
On that note, thanks again for being with us, Alex.
It's a pleasure, Monica.